Good afternoon, friends, and welcome to this special briefing on Prime Minister's visit to Singapore for the 16th ASEAN India Breakfast Summit and 13th East Asia Summit. I have with me Secretary East, the new Secretary East, Ms. Vijay Thakur Singh, and two Joint Secretaries, Joint Secretary ASEAN Anurag Bhushan and Joint Secretary South Manish, who will be taking us through Prime Minister's program in Singapore. After the initial remarks by Secretary East, we will have some time for a Q&A session. Ma'am, the floor is yours.
Good afternoon, and very nice meeting you. This is my first briefing, and this is on Prime Minister's travel to Singapore on 14th and 15th of November. This is Prime Minister's second visit to Singapore. You would recall that he had been there earlier in June this year when he had delivered the Shangri-La Dialogue keynote address, and he had spelled out a vision for Indo-Pacific. This time, Prime Minister will arrive in Singapore in the morning of 14th November, and he will leave in the late afternoon of 15th November. In this very short and focused visit of about 36 hours, there would be many engagements. Let me run you through the program. He arrives on the 14th, as I mentioned, and his first engagement is a keynote address at the Singapore FinTech Festival, where there is also an Indian pavilion. Then he would be attending the second RCEP summit meeting, and thereafter there would be space for bilaterals, and there would be a dinner which he would attend, which is being hosted by the chairman of ASEAN, Prime Minister Lee Hsien Loong, the current chairman of ASEAN. On the 15th, he starts his day with the ASEAN India Breakfast Summit, and thereafter there is the East Asia lunch retreat in which Prime Minister would participate, followed by an East Asia, the 13th East Asia Summit in a plenary setting. Immediately after the East Asia Summit, he would depart for India. So when he is in Singapore, you would notice that he is attending a number of summits, the RCEP Summit, the India-ASEAN Breakfast Summit, as well as the East Asia Summit. And apart from that, there would be bilateral meetings, and there would be the address at the Singapore FinTech Festival, and he would also be meeting the participants of the India-Singapore Hackathon. Now, the ASEAN meetings, they are annual meetings. They are very integral part of our diplomatic calendar. It is where India engages with the ASEAN countries, essentially because we have a very active Act East policy. We have continued engagement with our eastern neighbors. The ASEAN region, together with India, is actually one of the most dynamic economic spaces today. If you look at it, we have a combined population of 1.9 billion, which is a quarter of the world's population, and the combined GDP of 5 trillion. So India-ASEAN is essentially a very important economic blocking. It was if you go back into 2017, India and ASEAN celebrated 25 years of their engagement, of a dialogue partnership. They celebrated the 15th anniversary of their summit-level partnership and the 5th anniversary of their strategic partnership. And all these celebrations culminated in the India-ASEAN Commemorative Summit. You would recall was held in January this year, on 25th of January, and it was followed by the participation of all ASEAN leaders in the Republic Day celebrations, and they were chief guests, something which is very unprecedented, and it is a special gesture to India. The summit then resulted in the adoption of the Delhi Declaration, which will guide our work and our relationship, India's relationship with the ASEAN countries. So therefore, the forthcoming India-ASEAN Summit will be an occasion to review the progress that we have made and to have discussions which look at the 3 pillars of cooperation: political security, socio-economic, and cultural. Then the second engagement, I will first deal with East Asia Summit. the Prime Minister would be participating in the East Asia Summit, and that is a summit with which India has been engaged since its very inception in 2005. This will be Prime Minister Modi's 5th East Asia Summit, and I mentioned it will be held in two segments. One segment will be the retreat segment, where there will be interactive discussions between the leaders in an informal kind of setting, where they look at various global and regional issues, and thereafter there would be the formal East Asia plenary meeting. The issues which are on the table are many, including ICT, there is smart cities, there is maritime cooperation, there is transborder terrorism. At the end of the East Asia Summit, as is the normal practice, there will be a chair summary, and there would be other statements which considered appropriate by the leaders. East Asia Summit, if I may mention, is a very leaders-driven summit. It's a leaders-driven platform where they have discussions as they feel are on issues they need to focus on at that time. Then Prime Minister Modi will be participating at the second RCEP summit. And this summit is where there will be the 16 leaders of the 16 negotiating countries who are negotiating the RCEP. At this summit, they would review the progress that has been made in the negotiations of RCEP, which in fact are currently ongoing in Singapore. There is the ministerial meeting, which is in Singapore, and they are discussing RCEP at this stage. Then I will come to the othering. Then I can mention that on the sidelines of these summits, the 3 ASEAN-led summits, there would be time for bilaterals, and we are working on, and we are looking at bilaterals there and tying them up. Apart from that, Prime Minister would be participating and giving the keynote address at the Singapore FinTech Festival. Now, this is a festival which is one of the largest events on financial technology, and it is in its 3rd edition. This is for the first time that a head of government will be giving a keynote address, and it is essentially because there is a recognition that India has done a lot of work in leveraging technology for innovation, for development, and for financial inclusion. It's a large event. At one point of time, there are about 30,000 people there. So Prime Minister would be there giving the keynote address. In another very important event, Prime Minister would be meeting the participants of the India-Singapore Hackathon. Now, hackathon was agreed to when Prime Minister had gone to Singapore, and he had met Prime Minister Lee in June 2018. So that hackathon is taking place, and the Prime Minister would be meeting the participants there. There has been enthusiastic participation, about 80 participants from India and equal number from Singapore. And the lead is being taken by the Nanyang Technology University in Singapore and by the All India Council for Technical Education on our side. We do hope that, and we are confident that Prime Minister's visit to Singapore will give new momentum to the relationship and our engagement with ASEAN and the East Asia Summit, East Asia EAS leaders, apart from also strengthening India's relations with Singapore.
Thank you, ma'am. Now I open the floor to questions. We will take 2 questions at a time. Parikshit and Siddhant.
Ma'am, just a question on where we stand on the RCEP negotiations. There is considerable pressure from some of the ASEAN partners, including Singapore, to come up with a substantial agreement this time around, so that there are some substantial takeaways, and these negotiations have been going on for some time now. Where do we stand, and what kind of a conclusion can we look at the end of these RCEP negotiations?
Ma'am, the meet between Indian Prime Minister and the US Vice President, Mr. Pence, what are the key things which Indian side is going to put? Also on Quad, the Quad meeting is going to take place. India is going to focus on what are the sectors which India is going to focus, especially when it comes to India's policy on Indo-Pacific.
Should I? Okay, there are 3 sets of questions. One is RCEP, then there is the meeting, and then there is the Quad. Let me first of all confirm that there would be a meeting between Prime Minister and Vice President Mike Pence. We would, of course, brief you once the meeting has taken place and the outcomes of that meeting, but we confirm that there is a meeting. That meeting is taking place. Second, I would come to Quad. Let me say that India engages with countries in different formats and with many countries at the same time as well. We meet in bilateral levels, we meet in trilateral levels, we meet in quadrilaterals, we meet in plurilateral, we meet in multilateral. So this Quad meeting is something which is going to take place, but it's got nothing to do with East Asia Summit. It is a meeting which takes place at the official functional level between the 4 countries, and the agenda normally there is to look at how we can look at peace and security, peace and prosperity issues in the region. And the RCEP Summit. The RCEP Summit, as I told you, is on 14th of November. It is the time when the leaders will take a review of the negotiations that have been going on. These negotiations have been on since 2012, and I can only tell you this is a very important grouping. If you look at RCEP, 40% of the global trade is covered by countries who are involved in the RCEP negotiations. India has been adopting a very constructive position in these negotiations, but since there are so many countries involved and there are so many issues, and as I said, at this very moment, discussions are going on at the ministerial level. So I cannot prejudge the outcome, but we can say that progress has been made in these negotiations.
For both the meetings, for the meeting with the Vice President of the US and also for the Quad, normally we bring out a press release. For Quad, definitely, for after Prime Minister's meeting with US Vice President, we will have some kind of release which will give you details about the meeting which has just concluded. Next set of 2 questions, Manish.
Madam Secretary, it's been a little over 4 months since Prime Minister delivered the keynote address at Shangri-La Dialogue. What has been the evolution in our concept in thinking on Indo-Pacific, and will it figure in Prime Minister diplomatic outreach with leaders from East Asian countries at the breakfast meeting or otherwise? And also very briefly, what has been the progress in key deliverables, key outcomes that emanated from the Delhi Commemorative Summit, especially on maritime transport cooperation?
Ma'am, one more. Ian.
Can you give any details on the any announcements at the FinTech Festival? I mean, I think last time he was there, he mentioned some digital payment apps and had some announcements to make. I'm wondering if you can give us any details on what sort of initiatives might be launched there, if any. Thanks.
This was in the... See, let me start with the FinTech. FinTech is, as you know, last time when Prime Minister was in Singapore, there was the launch of the Rupiah card there in Singapore. It's during the last visit. This time we are looking at launching a platform which is the APIX. The ASEAN countries have put together their financial institutions on one platform, and we would be, Prime Minister would be launching that link with the Indian financial institutions. So that has been slated at the FinTech Summit. And coming to the Indo-Pacific, yes, the Indo-Pacific has been enunciated, and as you know that the principles of our Indo-Pacific are an open and a free, a progressive, prosperous Indo-Pacific region, which is inclusive and respects international law. So this has been the basic principles that we are enunciating. The discussions about working in the region together and what other countries have to say on Indo-Pacific is something which would happen there, because we are going to the region and we are in the region, and there will be talks on how different countries look at Indo-Pacific.
Next set of 2 questions. Akhilesh.
Madam, this is the first ASEAN summit after Prime Minister Narendra Modi met Chinese President Xi Jinping in Wuhan for informal summit. So, Prime Minister and President must have talked about Indo-Pacific. So, do you think that there will be any update from our side on the issue of Indo-Pacific, South China Sea, freedom of navigation, etc.?
Anybody else? Ranjit ji.
Would the Prime Minister be meeting Chinese leader there in Singapore?
We are looking, as you go into a summit, there are a lot of, we need scheduling issues, we have other issues. We will be working on bilateral meetings, and as and when they are finalized, we will be briefing you as to when those meetings take place. On a daily basis, GSXP would be there, and he would be briefing you on those meetings. As far as discussions are concerned on Indo-Pacific, it is, it's as we say, we are going into the summit. So we are going there, let us see what the discussions are and how they evolve. But definitely we are looking at working with many countries on how to look at progress and prosperity in the Indo-Pacific region.
Regarding the bilateral meetings, let me again mention that normally the day before we do bring out a schedule. So for the schedule on Wednesday, we will put something out tomorrow evening. So that will have details of all the Prime Minister's engagement, including the bilateral meetings as well. You also please keep in mind that there is another multilateral event taking place in Argentina, G20. So there are meetings which are being scheduled there, plus some meetings which are being scheduled on the sidelines of the ES. Any other question? Manish, you have?
My second question was not answered.
Please use the mic.
Madam, could you give a sense of progress in key outcomes that came out from the Delhi summit, especially the Maritime Cooperation Agreement, civil aviation? There are several initiatives that have formed up. What has been the progress so far?
I will spell out a couple. One of the decisions was that we will look at digital connectivity, and we put aside $40 million for digital connectivity in CMLV countries. So in all these countries, we are looking at a digital village connectivity. Our TCIL team has gone there, it's done its surveys, so we do hope that that progress will be reflected. We are looking at 2019 as the year of tourism between India and ASEAN, so that is another implementation. We are also looking at, as you say, maritime cooperation is very, very important. We've had two meetings on blue economy, one in Vietnam and one in India. So that is another area in the maritime domain in which we have had discussions. So a number of initiatives are taking. I won't spell all of them out, but we will go to the India-ASEAN Summit, and there would be a review of the implementation of the Delhi Declaration.
Mike.
This meeting with the US Vice President is scheduled on the 14th, if I'm not mistaken. Is it the 14th?
Yes.
Yes.
It's on the 14th. Thank you.
Any other query on any aspect of Prime Minister's visit to Singapore? I see none. Thank you, ma'am, for coming to this briefing. Thank you, Manish and Anurag, and thank you all for joining.